The Economics Club of IMI New Delhi brings a forum to contribute, share and learn in an environment that you create. The club organizes various events throughout the year and also writes a weekly blog that helps our viewers to appreciate the practical implications of business principles and events in the economic landscape. The post-budget session is one such initiative by the club that enlightens students about the fiscally driven environment of our nation. The budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values and aspirations. To address such aspirations, the government presented the interim budget of 2019 on February 1st. The budget is the most extensive account of the government's finances, in which revenues and expenses, earned and incurred respectively, are aggregated.
Just say that one of the things when I was being introduced, one of the things that was mentioned that I continue to be on leave from IMI. So it's a real privilege to be back here amongst you. And the campus has changed for the better, and I hope it continues to grow in the future. So we've got an excellent panel. Just a couple of sentences on the background to this budget. This was an interim budget. There's been a lot of controversy whether this was an interim budget or not. I guess as students, you don't want to get yourselves too much involved. I mean, you can't help getting involved in the politics, but not too much of the politics, right? But there will be some discussion on that as well. But to try and unravel what the budget contained, what the economy is going through, what's the farm distress, what's the agrarian crisis, and how much can really a budget document address some of the problems that we are facing, structural problems that we face in the Indian economy. So, I mean, a budget can do so much and no further. It's after all a statement of expenditure and accounts of the government. And the government can allocate more in certain sectors, less. How does it do that balancing act? Are there off-balance sheet items? When will they come on balance sheet? What is the difference between a cash and a... all those sorts of things are important, but for you as students, you should see how the budget mechanism works. Is it an instrument of policy? And how that policy is going to be implemented. In the backdrop of an economy which is going through, I mean, you can quibble about this, which is going through some agrarian crisis. There are problems of job creation. Numbers are coming out which some people believe, some people don't believe. There is a jobs issue, there's a sort of exports issue, there's an agrarian sort of crisis, and of course then there is of course the middle class that people say India will have the largest middle class, if not already, at least by I guess in 5 years will be a 5 trillion economy and then a 10 trillion economy. We are the 6th largest, or PPP, we are the 2nd largest, all of that. Right? So, I mean, you can look at the glass half full, look at the glass half empty, but I'm always reminded of Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So India will continue to be a part of, people who look at it, it's doing really badly, but a lot of people will say that the economy is doing well, and it is really the fastest growing major economy in the world. Whether it's 6.6 or 7.5, it's still, much faster than most of the other economies. China is going to go down to 5.9 or 6% for the next 5 years. So India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but at the same time, numbers come out which suggest that what is the accuracy or credibility of these numbers, right? I mean, jobs growth, exports growth, all are declining. So in the light of all this, can you have growth of 7.5%? So I'm going to ask Venu this question, but before that, to set the macro perspective and to where he sees, because he's got a seat within the government, I want Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal to give his views on what he thinks the budget did and what it could have done or it didn't do. Sanjeev.
Thank you very much. I'm also glad to see the room is rather full on a Sunday morning, which is a good sign. Although I have to say, I'm always disconcerted when I am introduced as being on a panel of eminent personalities. I will insist on being called Your Eminence from here on. But the thing before I go on to the budget is that this is literally the first time I've been on any event sponsored by an African agency. And I have to say, this is such a good thing, because it just really does reflect how the world that we live in is changing. So I would say this is a fabulous thing, and I'm going to mention this in other events as well, that Gabon, a country which almost most Indians are not even familiar with, should have, has the confidence to come and push its case in India. So I think it's a fabulous, fabulous thing. Okay, now on to the budget. Now the budget that you saw presented on Friday marks, in my view, a significant break from what was being attempted in the previous 4.5 years, and therefore signals in many ways a new sort of chapter in what this government wants to do, and presumably if it comes back to power will continue to do. And so what was it doing in the last 4.5 years? That's very critical for you to understand. What it was attempting to do in the last 4.5 years was essentially impose a macro stability on the system. Because in the previous several years, we had had growth. I mean, we can run quibbles about the exact level of growth, but in growth terms itself, it wasn't the real problem. The real problem was macro instability. You had spikes of very high inflation. You had a banking system doing unrestrained lending. You had fiscal profligacy with fiscal deficits in the 5-6 at 1 year or 6% of GDP, and so clearly there was something going off kilter. There was also a serious issue that we had clearly ended up with an economy that has always been like this, but certainly many of these issues came to a boil about having an economy that was essentially based on patronage and rent-seeking. So what was attempted in the last 4.5 years is to essentially impose order on the macro stability front. A lot of effort was put into that. So inflation came down from the 8 to 10% range. In fact, it had been double digits for a while. Now and we now have a framework, the monetary policy framework with clear targets. And interestingly, nobody would have believed it ex ante, but we have in fact a problem with actually hitting the bottom on occasion. We are right now in fact at 2.2% of GDP, 2.2% inflation. And so nobody would have believed that this would be the issue of debate, not inflation. So this was actually very important. You've also seen, while we are debating whether the fiscal deficit is 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, the fact that this is what is the debate is itself massive progress. And in fact, if you look at the budget numbers, you'll see that the primary deficit, which is the deficit excluding interest payments, is actually only 0.2% of GDP. So, i.e., for those things that the finance minister actually has control, we are actually running pretty much no deficit at all. The deficit is essentially interest payments on accumulated debt of the past, and we can debate how to solve that. My own view is that the solution for the interest part of it is really about getting structurally lowering interest rates in this country, and I'll come back to that again. But my view is that we need to, that is a RBI monetary policy rather than a fiscal solution. So for the bit that the budget has a control, we have actually, for the primary deficit, done a good job. So this was what was being attempted. Now the other thing that was being attempted is to create frameworks of governance. The MPC I already mentioned. The other was the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which was then used to do something very painful, which is to clean up the banking system. And as a result of that, as you may have already seen, some of the largest companies in the country have actually been taken through the grinder and have been bankrupted, being sold off. You've already had major companies like Bhushan being sold off. SR is pretty much on the way, and so on. So these are large companies, and the amounts of money that are coming back from this, from the sheer change in business culture, is in lakhs of crores. I think a number that was mentioned by the Honorable Finance Minister was something in the range of 3 lakh crores. So those are the kinds of monies coming back. Similarly, we did GST. You can quibble about exactly how it should have or shouldn't have been implemented, but it's something that incidentally was being debated even when I was your age, 20, 25 years ago. We finally got it done. And maybe it may not have worked perfectly in the first few months, but after several iterations, it by and large works. And whatever system exists in 50 years from now will essentially be a derivative of the system that we have today. You can keep simplifying it, and we are committed to doing it. But this broad framework will be basically what will still exist 50 years from now. That is incidentally also true of the way we did the IBC code, or for example, many other things, for example, the transparent auctioning of natural resources and so on. So this was what was done all this while. Some of it was, we recognize, painful, but it had to be done at some point in our history, and we did it. So now, what is being attempted now in this interim budget is a change in strategy to some extent. What is being done is to target certain segments of society directly, with hopefully in ways that cause as few unintended consequences as possible, so that the benefits of these wider reforms that we have done begin to trickle down. We are not, some sort of a left-wing government that is attempting blindly to do some transfers without taking into account the fact that there are unintended consequences. We want the trickle down to work. It is based on trickle down, but it has to work. It has to be enhanced in some way. So here is the three groups that were targeted specifically in this budget. First, the farmers. Why the farmers? Well, clearly, Indian farmers have had a problem for a very long time. There is droughts, there have been floods, there are all kinds of other issues that farmers have faced for a long time, infrastructure and so on. However, in the last couple of years, they have faced a completely new problem, which is that they have actually succeeded in doing the thing they've been always asked to do, which is to increase production. There have been dramatic increases in food production in the country, as a result of which we have a glut. And this is a serious issue, because we are saying the farmers should increase food production and other things, 2-3% a year or whatever it is. But in fact, meanwhile, population growth rate is falling. Population growth rate is now just below 1% every year. It will actually keep declining. So what do we now do? Do we ask the farmers to stop production, slow down production? Well, we'll have to, there's a longer term debate to be had about exactly what to do. But for the moment, we have a problem that this has caused structural price declines. This, at least in our judgment, is not a cyclical bounce. You may get some cyclical episodes going forward as well. So ironically, even more productive and efficient we become in agriculture, we will actually have this price decline further. So it was felt that we needed to do something as a top-up. This does not, by the way, solve every rural problem that has ever been. This direct transfer that we are attempting to do is a top-up to compensate for this specific problem of price decline. And why did we decide to do a direct transfer? Because we have done many things in the past, whether it is input price subsidies, procurements, and all kinds of minimum support prices, etc. In every single case, we have found that it causes unintended consequences. Either the input that is subsidized gets overused, it used to happen with urea, or it gets stolen to do other things not related to agriculture. Or if we keep increasing minimum support prices for certain crops, those crops get overproduced, and many other unintended consequences happen. So it was thought that this would be a neater, cleaner way of doing it. Secondly, perhaps for the first time, we may actually have the ability to do this. If we had attempted this 50 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do. But thanks to the Jam Trinity, we have much better chance of getting it right. Now, this doesn't mean that it is all going to be hunky-dory. There are still problems in many parts of the country in identifying who they are and so on. We fully understand that. But far better than any other point in history, we have a chance of getting it done. So this is something we're going to do. There will be frictions along the way, but as we have seen, we are, as a government, quite willing to take the chance and fix it along the way, as we did with GST. Next. The second group that was targeted was the middle class, specifically the lower middle class and middle class. Why this group? Well, actually, as a thank you for being such group troopers in the last 3 years. We are not unaware that many of the reforms that were done were very disruptive. They had to be done. Maybe the benefits will come in the long run. But it is true, we recognize that they were also disruptive. GST introduction, for example, this got all kinds of problems for the small and medium businessman. We recognize that demonetization was disruptive. The credit flow in the system was clearly disrupted by our attempt to clean up the banking system, because we had to essentially shut down the banking system to clean it. We may be now getting it going, but all of these things were disruptive, and the middle class clearly was affected by it. And I have to say that there were really good troopers along the way. In a country where for rather small idiotic reasons you'll end up having riots and demonstrations. In the end, people have not really, they've grumbled about it, but they have basically carried on throughout many of these disruptions. So we thought that a time had come where some of the benefits of the fact that we are seeing better compliance, improvements of various kinds, should begin to feed through at least to the lower and middle class. So this is a sort of a thank you to that segment. The third group is labor in the unorganized sector. Now this is not because of any recent, the other two segments are being targeted because of some recent phenomena, price declines, disruptions and so on. The unorganized worker is being targeted for a totally different thing. There is a longer term agenda of creating a basic safety net of some sort. This is being attempted with Ayushman Bharat as well. But we felt that there is one group that always slips through anything we do, which is the unorganized sector worker. This is the dhobi, the rickshaw puller, whatever that class. And they are really, especially, and many of these things that they do are manual activities, i.e. after the age of 60, it's not, there is a physical limit to what they do. So an attempt is being made to create some sort of a basic safety net for them. For those earning below the wage of 15,000 a month. So this is really for the bottom end of this category. Some estimate of 10 crores or something is being given. And sure, the amount is 3,000. It's not a huge amount, but something will be put in. Again, the DBT framework of Aadhaar, Jan Dhan Yojana, etc., that has a lot of effort has been put in place. This is basically the attempt. So this is basically what is being done. That going into this election cycle, we are going to essentially have these three things were targeted by this government, and more this change and effort will be done should this government come back to power. With that, let me pass it back to Rajat.
Thanks, Ajay. So you heard about the sort of overall macro picture and what the government was trying to target with this budget, and absolutely right, these were the three groups that were sort of at the center of what the finance minister was trying to achieve. So I'll come back to Mr. Charan Singh on the macro, but before that, getting a little bit into the micro details, let me sort of get Venu from his perspective and ask him about where he sees the numbers going, GDP growth, jobs, current account deficit, and also an important policy that was announced just before the budget. Again, keeping the middle class in mind, was this e-commerce policy, and being management students, you must have must be aware of it. This came out sometime on the 27th of December or thereabouts of the DIPP Note 2, where there were restrictions on Amazon and Flipkart and Walmart also, and how they are able to conduct their business.
Ground level, spoken to CMI, Mahesh Vyas of CMI, whose employment data for 2018 is very it's very disturbing because he also, if you now the NSSO report, the report which has come out, numbers that NSSO gives, they pretty much directionally correspond with what CMI says. I've noticed in the last 3-4 months CMI was being, the messenger was being shot, you know. So the data provided by CMI now it seems has a basis in their, you know, you could go to CMI website and see the methodology. I'm not sort of holding a brief for CMI, but as it turns out, the NSSO and CMI data, they're pretty close to each other on unemployment. Now, my only thing is that if it was so disruptive, I wish the government had come out with a white paper on the nature of disruption in the informal sector, whether caused by demonetization or by GST. Even today, we really don't know what has happened to really micro, small, medium enterprises. You know, so the big industry has obviously welcomed GST because they, you know, the big industry did not get affected by the costs of shifting to a new tax system. You know, they had their lawyers, they had their CAs. Even today, this is small fellows who are really hurting on GST, and they're still complaining, grumbling, as Sanjeev said. But we'll have to see how long will it take for order to return. Now, there is a disruption, there is a disorder, temporary as it may be. But I would still want to see the damage that has been done to the informal sector, to the small sector. I don't think there's any real data forthcoming, except RBI, which has from time to time has done surveys suggesting that there was huge output loss on account of demonetization, and also subsequently on account of the back-to-back. They came so close to each other that it was like a double whammy. And so I would like to see that, number one. And number two, data with this government has been, the way data has been interpreted, presented, very disappointing to say the least. Especially now, even going by their numbers, if you look at the GDP data, there is from 2015-16 when there was 8 point plus GDP growth, we are ending with about 7%, 7.1, 18-19. So if you draw a line, there's a declining trend, right? So there is, so my contention is that, well, let me quote Arun Jaitley. When he returned as finance minister after his recovery of his kidney transplant, he wrote in his blog that GDP growth has been subpar, he admitted. And then he said that he was, however, satisfied with the macroeconomic stability. Now, on macroeconomic stability, I'd just like to point one thing. Our economy is now so dependent on, even for revenues, on oil. If you look at the indirect tax revenues, you know, GST, of course, oil is not subsumed in GST, but oil is a very, very big part of, you know, our revenues, as well as oil is also a single kind of item which every once in a while, when oil prices go up, when it crosses 80, all our macro indicators go haywire. You know? So we saw in October, November, for 2 months, there was no talk of macroeconomic stability, because suddenly all the analysts in Bombay, the markets were going haywire. Rupee was at 75, 76. There was talk of current account deficit going back up to 3.5. Of course, it got corrected. It got corrected, and things are much better now because the oil prices fell. So, what does that tell you? What that tells us is that our macroeconomic stability is so dependent on oil prices. Now, is there a way? I mean, we have very eminent economists here. Charan Singh might be able to. Is there any way that we insulate ourselves, our macroeconomic stability, from oil prices? Now, we are a net oil importing country where 80% of our oil consumption is depends on imports. So for me, this is a really big worry. So how much are we dependent on oil for macroeconomic stability, oil prices? So it's all, in that sense, it's all exogenous. It's from our stability comes from the outside, and it's a get disrupted from the outside. You know? So what are the domestic policies which can insulate us from this huge risk of oil crossing 80? And it all depends on what Russia does or Saudi Arabia, what the OPEC does. You know, all non-transparent bodies, I would suggest. You know, so now the other thing that worries me, I'll just come to the budget after pointing to one or two more macro factors which worries me, is that I don't remember any other 5-year period since economic reforms. I've been watching very closely, watching policy making and watching writing about the economy since 1991, even before that. So if you take 1991 as cutoff point, tell me one 5-year period of any government where GDP growth has been 7% plus and exports growth has been negative. Now what does that tell you? We in 2013-14, we were some exports were some 15 billion odd, and 2017, 18 or 18, 19 is lower than that. This really worries me because this tells me that India at some level is not, we are losing our global competitiveness. And in the same period, comparable countries, Vietnam, you take any of the emerging economies, their exports have not registered such a negative growth. You know, they have managed to sort of, you know, keep their competitive. Bangladesh, you know, even if you take China. This for me is a big worry because today you cannot say that India is not globalized enough, because if you take our total trade, it's nearly 46% of our GDP. You know? You add import, export, and everything, right? Yeah, and so yeah. So for me, this is the second worry. And these are, I'm not saying that these are peculiar to this regime. These are continuing problems. It has, you could argue that this problem has, especially after the global financial crisis, this problem has deepened. You know, we are in some kind of a decline in terms of our competitiveness, global competitiveness. Now coming to this budget, my only, as Dr. Ram we are informally discussing, there is an ethical dimension because this budget has, for the first time, tinkered with tax slabs, not tax rates, and it has tried to sort of woo the middle class, earning with taxable income of 5 lakh less annually. Now, so it gives them, for people with taxable incomes between 2.5 lakh a year to 5 lakh a year, they would save 12,500 rupees a month, which was the tax they would have paid. So now there's no tax. So there is a middle class which would be happy. The next government will not be able to roll back, in my view, this. So therefore, there's an ethical dimension to this because you passed on something to the next government, passed on to say a certain burden to the next government. And as far as the farmers, delivery to farmers is concerned, the direct 6,000 rupees direct income transfer to farmers, I would say it is too little too late. I wish they had thought through this and done a more comprehensive thing in the last budget. This works out to, like, you know, per farm family some 17 rupees or 3 rupees per head per day. You know? So 17 rupees for a family per day. So and the farmers are really, I have spoken to a lot of, I was on TV and a lot of farmers in UP and all were being interviewed. So they were not really very impressed. They were saying, well, they were looking for some big structural changes in the way the farm economy works. It's a difficult thing. I'm not saying it's easy to. Like they're still complaining about how cost of seeds, fertilizer, diesel, electricity, all the input costs have gone up, and they don't think that this income transfer, which one of them said in Hindi, "Oot ke muh mein jeera ki tarah hai," so whether this will improve their condition, and of course there are other structural issues in delivering directly to farm incomes. And this structural issue is not restricted to this regime. Even Telangana, which has come up with a direct transfer, even they have faltered in terms of they're only giving it to land owning farmers. So one of the big structural problems in terms of data is that how do you deliver this to tenant farmers who are tilling for many years on behalf of some absentee landlord. That is an issue which will today I have seen the minister saying, urging states to give data. Now I don't know how states will produce data on tenant farmers. And I'm told that in Andhra Pradesh, 50% of the farmers are tenant farmers as per a survey done by Andhra government. So other states may have also done similar surveys. So my information is that tenant farmers range between some states 30%, some states 15%, some states 40%. How will you deliver this to tenant farmers? So that's a big issue. That's what I'm saying. The problem with even Telangana's thing is it doesn't give to tenant farmers. And over the years, I am told, yesterday I spoke to a farmer from Telangana. He said over the years, through kacha transactions, a lot of farmers sold their land to tenants. Like you do in power of attorney in Delhi, right? So, Jharkhand or even that Naveen Patnaik, who's trying to sort of build a list of tenant farmers. He's trying to give it to tenant farmers also. I don't know how he's going to do it. I'm not studying. Finally, on fiscal deficit. GDP growth, there are a lot of quibble about GDP numbers. I, for one, I don't believe that in the year of demonetization you could have had, they've upgraded GDP growth from 7.1 to 8.2. That for me is, I don't want to say anything. So, in a year when you withdraw 85% of cash take 4-5 months to recover, with half your population standing in queues, not going for work, I don't know how GDP growth went up to 8.2. I don't know. Fiscal deficit. I just read Moody's small one-line item. Moody's credit negative on this budget. So we have a person from Moody's sitting here. I asked him, what does this mean? So he said it's a caution. It's not a negative outlook, but it's a caution. A lot of people don't believe the fiscal numbers. Recently there was a CAG report which suggests that this government has done so much off-budget borrowings, massive, that if you add that, T.N. Nayanan wrote an edit in Business Standard, and T.N. Nayanan is a very well-regarded economist. He puts a figure of off-budget borrowings extra, off-balance sheet borrowings by the government, at over 1 percentage point, 1 to 1.5 percentage points. And Nayanan puts the overall figure, sector and states together at about 8.2%. So I don't think people believe the fiscal deficit figures. Even the market does not believe. That's why the bond yields were seen as tightening. So from time to time, bond yields have been tightening, coming down. But so it's yo-yoing. Yo-yoing means it's also confused. So I don't know how this will pan out. And to give you just one data point, how this government has pushed a massive one item of borrowing into the Food Corporation of India's books. Borrowings have really gone up, So instead of government borrowing, Food Corporation India borrowing. Similarly, their divestment targets of 80,000 crore, 90,000 crore, or 1 lakh crore. I'm sorry to say, largely met through PSUs buying into each other's shares. So what this does is, if ONGC buys 50% of HPCL, so all the money goes from ONGC's reserves into governments, because government is selling ONGC shares. So then what happens is ONGC ends up borrowing. So again, the government's borrowing shifts to the PSU. So recently, one of the highest dividend-paying companies, Rural Electrification Corporation, 8-9% dividend, was suddenly merged into a totally loss-making Power Finance Corporation with some 14,000-15,000 crore NPAs, where some of the big power sector guys have borrowed, who have not repaid their. I don't want to name those guys. They are very well known, the power sector mafia, which is also avoiding the going to NCLT. They've gone to the Supreme Court. So suddenly, all these PSUs are now, their cash reserves are showing up as divestment target met. So I think this is totally out of, not in order. This has never happened before. So at some point, next government, whoever, they will be left with PSUs like keep constantly borrowing from the market and no real divestment in the sense. Meaning of divestment is that the public at large should own PSU shares. I think that makes sense. So these are some of the structural problems that this government would leave for the next government which comes to tackle. It could be their government, it could be some other government. Thank you.
Thanks. So several issues you raised. Can I have the mic? So I think you raised several issues, and I'll come back to Sanjeev on the quality of the data. I think he wants to respond on that. But before that, interestingly, the way you ended, it's a good segue to bring in Professor Charan Singh. And I also want to add a question on the growth figures and how you're getting this 3.4% of GDP as fiscal deficit in the next year. What is the nominal growth rate? I think the government has assumed about 11.2% is nominal growth rate, and there's a sort of tax buoyancy embedded in those figures, and whether we're going to meet that 3.4% or not, and given the sort of paucity of disinvestment proceeds and so on, points that Venu is raising. Also want to raise another issue, which is sort of come up in the run-up to the budget, and I think as students you'll be interested in, and I think Professor Charan Singh is especially well placed to answer this question, is about the independence of the RBI in some sense, and the sort of dividend that the RBI pays to the government. There's a committee out there which is going to give its recommendations. But this issue has come in for a lot of sort of public discussion and debate, not only sort of the dividends paid by the RBI to the government, not only through their sort of open market operations, but also, buying and selling of foreign exchange. RBI, as you know, buys at a certain rate and sells at a certain rate. If money is flowing out at, a much more depreciated rate than it bought at, then of course also there is some sort of profit that the RBI makes, and there has money which has gone out at 70 plus, and a lot of people say that this is money that has been made. The RBI has excess liquidity, and therefore this should be given to the government, and government has a right over this. Of course, there's an RBI Act which talks about when and how the RBI will pay dividend to the government. So I just wanted to bring in, because it relates to the overall fisc of the government, whether this is something that Professor Charan Singh, in addition to talking about what he views this budget as.
So thank you so much for this, and I think you raised a number of issues, and both Sanjeev and Venu have raised so pertinent issues, and one can easily see the divide on either side. So it's so interesting. Let me start with this question of the RBI's independence, and I've written a lot on it, and I have discussed it at various forums. What I'll do now is just give you 1 minute bird's eye view into it. I have always held the view that in a marriage, no spouse can claim independence after marriage. Before marriage, they can do whatever they want. Once they are married, they better stay in a marriage contract. In modern days, you have open marriages. I can't do with anything about that. But a proper marriage means which spouse is independent. Now, given the fact, and I ask a very simple question. We know civilizations have lasted 5,000 years. Our own has lasted more than 5,000 years. Sanjeev has a beautiful book on India's civilization. When did the central bank come into existence? When civilization lasted, governments have lasted. When did central bank come into existence? When did the first central bank come into existence? Swiss Bank, right? Riksbank. 1694, Bank of England. In our own country, 1935. 1934 Act, 1935. The governments have lasted 5,000 years. The central bank comes not even 100 years back and now says I will rival the government. I find it very strange. And if everybody wants to read about this literature, they should just go and read what America, which claims to be a pretty independent central bank. Ben Bernanke, even Alan Greenspan, the god of finance, said that I'm independent within the Congress. You can't be independent of an elected government who's seeking votes every 5 years in this country every year. So my thought on independence is, I think the Reserve Bank got it wrong, and I think the government was super tolerant. I don't mind. In any marriage relationship, each spouse has a right to express whatever they want to express. That should be it. Some things are expressed inside the house, sometimes things are expressed to the neighbor. Fair enough, that's okay. But this went too far. As far as the issue that you raised about the liquidity, I mean, I'm very sorry to tell you that all these issues of basically the PCA, which was the thorny issue that came up, the PCA, there's prompt corrective action, all of these emerge basically from Basel norms. And I have a very different take on Basel norms. I'll again be very, very brutally truthful with you. See, I especially told these people not to mention it, but I'm prompted to tell you now. I chair Punjab and Sindh Bank. This Punjab and Sindh Bank was formed in 1908. The objectives of Punjab and Sindh Bank, when it was formed in 1908, was nothing else but financial inclusion. It wanted to serve the poor and the needy and give them money. Different from other banks, many of the banks came into existence not to serve the poor. Actually, the word bank itself comes from a money lender. They have to make profits. 1905, India had the first cooperative movement. So we are the pioneers in financial inclusion, not Bangladesh and somebody who's got the Nobel Prize. It should belong. The Nobel Prize in financial inclusion belongs to India, not being fully recognized. Now, I chair a bank, 111 years old. I'm not the oldest bank. Punjab National Bank is 150 years. Allahabad Bank is 150 years. State Bank is 200 years. Canara Bank is 100 years. 10 banks in this country are more than 100 years. And you know what? I'm told to follow Basel norms. Now what is Basel norms? Please read the history. Google, all of you have. In that country, banks don't last even one generation, which is 25 years. Every 10 years they have a financial crisis. Many banks are lost. Means ulta chor kotwal ko dhante. Ulti ganga beh rahi hai. I should tell the world how to run a bank. I have survived the 1857 mutiny. I have survived the 2 world wars. I have survived the Great Depression. I have survived partition. Punjab Sindh Bank, before partition 11 banks, after partition 2 banks. And as traditions have it, because I am the big brother India, I had to compensate the banks which landed in Pakistan and recover them, right? So from 2 banks, I'm 1500 banks today and 1200 ATMs. And I'm told, follow Basel norms. Country where never a bank has survived more than 20. We need to relook at Basel norms from its very origin.
I agree.
And I'm calling it a new name.
Yeah.
I'm calling it New Delhi Mumbai norms. New Delhi the owner, Mumbai the regulator. How they go together. And I'll tell you something more funny. And please forgive me. You are younger than me also. Forgive me. I have lost faith in rating agencies. I know, you know why? What they did in 2008, the whole world collapsed. The Queen of England is asking, hey, economist, where did you go? I wanted to tell the Queen, ask that question to the rating agencies. What they did? Rating agencies don't have a short history, they have a very long history. But in India, they taught us the lesson under ILFS.
Triple A to D.
Huh? So sitting next to him is worrying me. So I've lost faith in rating agencies. Therefore, I want to tell you, please, students, I tell my staff, have faith in yourself. We have lasted 5,000 years. Nobody better than Sanjeev can tell you. And out of those 5,000 years, for 3,000 years, we were the richest country. And richest country we didn't become without financing. We also had money lenders. We had hundi. all financing used to take place. So I'm not going to learn banking from countries where banks didn't exist. If they have to learn something on banking, financing, trade, they better come to me. I will teach them. I'll start a global institute of banking and financial services. So to cut the second component, what is this PCA? What are these Basel norms? I think India should stand on its feet and tell them that if India can survive the Great Depression, the global financial crisis, we have established, none of our banks collapsed, and therefore under the Basel norms, recognition of PCAs, I don't recognize at all. I will set my own norms and I establish who should be under PC and who should not be under PC. That takes care of the special questions that was posed to me. Let me come back to the budget now. Sanjeev, I'm really thankful to you for telling us what is the view inside, but I will tell you the view outside, as I had perceived the budget. Last 70 years, under the infant hypothesis that my industry is young, my industry is small, my industry needs protection, every government, especially from the time of Mahalanobis, had been providing lots of sops to the industry. This industry, because they had got used to like a brat child, always getting parents' attention, had really started now, had sufficient resources, sufficient money, has established itself, and now getting into automation and artificial intelligence would have taken it on a different route. This country, which is suffering you call it because people are not employed, or call it the benefit of demographic dividend, very young people, they are sitting in the country waiting for jobs. The trend which industry is taking into artificial intelligence automation, they are not going to be creating jobs. The jobs are sitting in agriculture, farm and MSMEs. So sitting outside the government, my perception of giving so much of benefit to the farm sector was basically saying that this is the future that we have. They are going to create jobs. Little artisan. Look, I know industries in Bombay, cloth, textile industries, 100 crore investment, 5 employees, everything automated, computerized. But one single artisan making pots employs 3 people. So that is where I think the future is. Now that quickly brings me to the very critically evaluated question of what is employment. I'm sorry, but I believe, I've set up a new think tank called the EGROW Foundation. I'm looking for an office boy for that. I'm not getting. Everybody seems to be well employed and I'm telling them I'm ready to pay you 10,000 rupees or whatever is the running rate. I'm not getting. They have high expectations.
I'll send you one.
You please send me. The point I'm making is how do you define employment? To me, I'm very comfortable if this guy who's engaged even in making pakoras every day and no time for anything else during the day, but he has to make provisions for pakoras in the evening, sell it for 2 hours. Look, I am a person who comes in Ola most of the time. Even today I've rented a car to come here. I asked the driver, I'm looking for a driver. I've shifted to Delhi recently. I'm looking for a driver. And he said, sir, how much will you give me? I said, what is the running rate? He said, the running rate is 15,000 for a driver like yours because you people work from some time to time. I said, okay, fine, good news. Can you join? No, I can't join. I make 35,000 rupees a month. I'm surprised. If somebody says this guy is a Ola driver, is unemployed, for me he's not ready to even shift to my driving business. So I think we need to redefine what employment is. I'm not shy of saying that if a person is engaged in something productive for him, himself, his family, he can protect himself, earn his bread, he's employed. The other way of looking at employment is, I come from Delhi, but I have relatives in Punjab, so I've gone through the whole phase of 1984 and before 1978. I've also had lots of interaction with people in Kashmir, my father being in army posted there, and also because I have relatives in Chhattisgarh. Now let me tell you, if people are unemployed, they do 3 things. Either they go to drugs, as they do in Punjab, or they pelt stones at military trucks, as they do in Kashmir, or they join Maoist activities, as they do in Chhattisgarh. Right? keep them engaged, keep them employed. The rest of the country, I don't find that happening. So my point is that the farm sector, the MSMEs, were given this impetus so that employment generation takes place, and that is how I looked at the emphasis on this budget. So therefore, I like that emphasis. Now, Sanyal has just gone, but I'll tell you that I was looking at the interest payments myself. The interest payment figure is very large. If it had happened in the corporate sector, there would have been interest rate restructuring. There could have been restructuring of the tenor of the loan. Why can't the government, which is the largest borrower in the country, do the same? So that has not been done, and therefore he was right in his observation that the interest burden is very high. Two more points which I think are very crucial, not being touched either by Sanjeev or not directly by Mr. Venu. Look, I have held the view that corruption is rampant in this country. Various studies have been done within the country, World Bank studies have been done, individually all of us are aware of it. This budget specifically speaks about corruption. And the other thing I like there is entertainment industry. Now I have my old institution, I am Bangalore. There is Professor Vaidyanathan there, a very respected professor. His work is basically on black money, unaccounted money. And in his own research, he finds that entertainment industry is one industry where lots of unaccounted money comes in and gets engaged and gets recycled. I'm very happy that the government has stepped in and for the first time ever, entertainment industry has a paragraph dedicated to it. Now I wish that the next step will be that they will say we would like auditing of all entertainment industry and all movies and all film industry accounts will have to be audited and entertained. So corruption is one thing which they brought it on board. Entertainment industry for the first time being brought on board, I think is very, very interesting for them. What I would have thought from the budget was, instead of collecting 100 rupees a month from people in the unorganized sector, which is a difficult thing, which is probably going to be repulsive and people will not do it, why could the government not be gracious enough to start a universal pension? After all, at the end of the day, you are giving like 3,000 rupees, and if you think people below the poverty line are 30% of the population, we could have started a universal, a very graceful way of doing it rather than telling them to come and give me 100 rupees a month. The second thing, there are studies done, very well documented studies by the IMF, World Bank, even within the country. Labor force participation, female labor force participation in the country is amongst the lowest. Even the only country which has lower female labor force participation than India is Pakistan. And I don't think we would compare ourselves with Pakistan, right? Even Nepal has 80% female labor force participation, Bangladesh has 75%, we Indians have only 30%. So my thought was that female labor force participation, they have referred about the females encouraging them, and what encouragement basically they are thinking in terms is the Mudra loan, 70% of the Mudra loan goes to the women, that's how they brought them in. But I would have thought a far better tax concession to female labor would have brought in many more educated, trained, skilled. After all, microfinance institutions, joint liability groups have proven again and again that women are very, very reliable when it comes to finances. We could have brought them into the labor force, and if we bring them into the labor force, there are studies of the IMF which show our growth rate will instantly increase by 25%. That means if we are growing at 8%, we will start growing at 10% if more female labor force happens in the country. I would have expected that to happen, and that unfortunately didn't happen. Means I am of the view, I don't mind if you tell that any female in the workforce will have total income tax free. I'm sure many men will sit home. I don't want that, of course, but female labor force participation will increase, and female labor force participation has shown they're more responsible financially, and the money that will be given tax-free to them will eventually end up in goods on which indirect taxes will flow to them. The last 2 points I want to make, and if you can permit me, is the issue which I think was partly touched by Mr. Venu, the oil thing. He's so right. What they decide in OPEC, I think his observations are very good. OPEC, Russia, these countries are so translucent, we hardly know how they take price decisions on oil, and we get impacted. We need to go aggressively and not allow these oil cars and big cars on the road. It's tricky, it's difficult, but one day as we use the sledgehammer on gold, probably we'll have to use the sledgehammer on oil also. Carpooling lanes can be started, expensive parking slots can be started, so people come in public transport. Various things are possible, needs to be done. On export, again that issue came up, and that's I think Venu brought it out very well. My own feeling is that when the global economy is sagging, which it was sagging in the last 3 years, when the global economy growth rate is sagging, and there is a trade war taking place between USA and China, Japan is still not recovering, and Brexit is happening. In this sort of a situation, it is very important. In this sort of situation, exports are going to suffer. There's no doubt about it. One should accept it. But then one should prepare the hinterlands of the country from where demand will come. And that is where I thought the emphasis on the farm sector was basically sustaining demand, sustaining consumption in the farm sector. So industry gets a push, and industrial output gets the benefit of the farm sector. Let me close here now. Thank you so much for giving me this time.
Thank you. We have one speaker left, so may I now invite Anu Bhatia. There are certain questions raised by Professor Charan Singh also, and I would like you to respond to that. But I also want you to especially address the question of the fiscal deficit and how rating agencies, despite the position that you've been put in right now, despite that, how do you see this 3.4%? Would you react like Keynes did, right? When I see new data, I change my mind. Would you sort of give the benefit to the finance minister that there's new information coming, I couldn't help it, and therefore I had to sort of put on the back burner fiscal consolidation? Not that we are not going to achieve it, but we are going to achieve it, but it will take a little more time, maybe 1 or 2 months. Are you going to give the finance minister the benefit of that doubt, given that overall, as Sanjeev said, and I think everybody's saying, the macroeconomic situation is not so bad, it's bad, but it's not so bad. And will that benefit then creep into the rating of the country agencies in the long run?
Thank you. So, disadvantage of speaking at the last, because many points are covered about the budget, but there are many questions and some valid ones, some concerns about the credit rating agencies. Just to answer the first question about the concern about rating agencies like banks, credit rating agencies have survived over long time. And within India as well, Indian credit rating agencies have been there for more than 25 years now. And globally, they have been there for much longer, and they have survived everything, financial crisis, Lehman moment, where the global rating agencies saw downgrade or bust of a rating which was a AAA. So yes, we have a ILFS movement, but we are confident that we would survive that too. And that has to happen once in a 1 decade or 2 decade time. I am not saying it's a good thing to have, but ratings are meant to have some probabilities of default which decline as you go up. But AAA does not mean zero probability of default. We say that is the lowest probability of default for the next 3 to 5 years. And banks have also seen tough times, so the rating agencies have. And rating agencies are going under a crisis time where there is a reputation survival, I won't say, but reputation risk involved, and we have to recover fast. And I truly believe that digital transformation, technology will help not only banks, but also the rating agencies to upgrade their processes to have closer monitoring of ratings, which will improve their monitoring of the rating and timely action they can take to downgrade or upgrade a rating of a company. with this, I would come back to the part of fiscal deficit, and Venu raised the point about Moody's concerns, highlighting that the budget is a great negative. There's a commentary. First, I would like to make it very clear that Moody's has BA2 rating for India, BA2 with a stable outlook, which is the best rating since 1991. We had higher rating BA1, A2 before 1991, but of last 26, 27 years, this is the best rating by Moody's. And Moody's has been expecting that the fiscal consolidation will take place, and if there is a slippages, they would be concerned. I am not directly from Moody's, I am from ICRA, but what I understand that our parent would be concerned about the slippages in fiscal consolidation. And what is happening, it was said that it would be 3.3%, instead of that is more than that, 3.4%. But what is more worrying is the next year fiscal deficit number, which is in place of 3.1%, it is 3.4%. Finance Minister acknowledged that this number would have been very well 3.1% if this farm support income was not provided. And I would just like to add one more thing, which Sanjeev would agree with me, that not only the farm income support, which is 75,000 crore, which is putting up the pressure on fiscal deficits, is also the interest payment for the oil and fertilizer bonds which were issued in the past. Those were issued during 2005 to 2010 with a duration of 10 to even 20 years. So partly answering your question, that you can't finance a bond which has been issued, refinance a bond which is issued by the government of India itself, committing 7.5 to 8% return on those bonds for as long as 15 to 20 years. And there is 1.5 lakh crore bonds outstanding for oil and fertilizer, which were shifted to the next generation. This is the burden which we have to pay, or our next generation has to pay, because these will get mature from somewhere from 21 to 26. And till then, the government of India will have to pay interest of 10,000 crore, roughly of 10,000 crore every year, which comes to 0.06% of fiscal deficit and 0.06% of GDP. So if you deduct that 0.06%, we are very well in the range of 3.3%. But rating agencies certainly, especially global ones, have to be concerned about the fiscal slippages and the goalpost of 3% fiscal deficit getting shifted year on year. Every time we talk in the budget, we say after 3 years we will achieve 3.5%, 3%, not in the immediate 2 years. That is a concern from rating agency perspective. Answering these questions related to rating agencies and fiscal deficit, I would just like to touch about my views on the budget and how it can help the country in the medium to long term. One, the rebate of the middle class or lower middle class per se should not be just seen from the perspective that they are honest taxpayers, they are paying tax on timely manner. There will be many who are not. And that segment has been attracted to come on stream. And that formalization of the economy, say if somebody was doing some tax management to save tax and come in the bracket of 2.5 lakh, he will certainly have the incentive to go up to 5 lakh. And more white money you have through this process, which is being, once you file the return and say that you have earned this money rightfully by paying no tax, because you don't have to pay tax till 6.5 lakh rupees income or 5 lakh rupees income. When you spend that money to buy goods, you contribute to the exchequer through indirect taxes. So that will help the country in the medium to long term. Especially, I have seen many budgets over last 8 to 10 years, closely analyzed some. I have been part of the oil sector, so I will come to some question related to the oil sector. But main thing is this budget I have seen which carries positive for most of the corporate industries. Banking and financial, I am not too sure, because it's good for housing finance companies, neutral for banks, but I can tell you it's positive for how many sectors, starting with the real estate, which has direct benefits from the budget, because There is no notional rental income tax on the second house. There is no tax which has to be paid by the developers on the unsold inventory for 2 years instead of 1 year. And there are many middle class tax incentives, rebates, which will push up people to buy more houses, and hence is a direct positive for the real estate sector. Indirect positive also this budget carries for various sectors. Auto, for example, one. Tractors, two-wheelers, FMCG, consumer durables, all these sectors are expected to benefit from the benefits which have been given to farmers or middle class. Finally, this 75,000 crore and 18,000 crore in terms of tax rebates is going to be in the hands of people, and they have to spend it. And it's a cascading effect which will lead to higher sales in various sectors. And this is the one budget where I can see it's positive of many corporate sector, including infrastructure. Rural roads allocation has gone up by 26%, railways allocation has gone up by 20%. So it will be good for capital goods and infra sectors as well. Besides, I believe that indirect impact will also trickle down to cement and steel sector. When I say all these sectors, I will be wrong to not to say which are the negative sectors which will get impacted because of this budget. One is starting with the oil. We already have gross under recoveries or subsidies, oil subsidies, which are there for 9 months, which are around 30,000 crore, and they are expected to be 42,000 crore for the full year FY 18-19, while the government has allocated only 25,000 crore. So there will be spillover of 15 to 17,000 crore as far as oil subsidies are concerned. So their oil sector, oil marketing companies will have to borrow, will have to meet their interest payment, and that will put pressure on them because there will be some delays in terms of subsidy reimbursement. Another is fertilizer. Here the subsidy allocation has gone up, and it's a positive for the sector that subsidy allocation has gone up from 65,000 crore to 70,000 crore. But this sector has faced a unique issue that every year around 30,000 crore of subsidies are spilled over to the next year, and the trend is expected to continue. And 30,000 crore, when you allocate only 65-70,000 crore of allocation and 30,000 crore you have to pay for the last year, for the next financial year everything gets over within first half year, and the second half year the fertilizer comes back, which is roughly 1,500-2,000 crore on the fertilizer players, which is a continuous phenomenon, not the problem of this government or this budget. Another issue in the sector which I think the allocation has been low is the textile. It's a very important from employment generation as well, and here I see that allocation has gone down for or has been low for TUFS scheme, as well as there is a scheme of remission of state levies, where the revised estimate for FY19 are 3,600 crore, while the budget allocation for FY20 is just 1,000 crore. So here I see there is some scope, or maybe there could be some revised estimate for FY20 when we see those numbers could change up. But that ROSS scheme allocation is crucial to maintain exports from apparel industry, and that is very important touch point I thought to touch. Disinvestment, I agree with Venu that ONGC HPCL issue, HPCL would be one company in the, I think, in the whole world which says President of India or government is my promoter with 0% stakes. So those kind of issues, if companies, the management are not gelling with, that can be an issue by selling one oil company to another oil company or one PSU to other PSU. This is not correct form of disinvestment at times. These are the key things I thought I would touch upon.
Okay. You haven't given you've given borrowing figures spillover to next year. You didn't give the borrowing by FCI.
Yeah, that I am not excluding. That I am not including. I am saying within the budgetary allocation. But it is better. I would, in the same breath, I would also mention that the previous governments there was oil bonds which were totally out of the budgetary things, and it was a burden for future generation which we are paying now. At least it's better than spillover is better than issuing something like oil bonds which are there for 15-20 years. Yeah.
But it gets passed out of the next government.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the budget is a political document. I think it will be foolhardy to only look at it as an economic document. It is a political document. And the question I wanted to ask the panelists, and I will ask maybe at the end, is: do you? I know Sanjeev's answer, and I think I know Venu and Professor Charansingh's answer as well. Is that did you as students find that whether the government abused this privilege of presenting a budget before elections? Did they actually, or would you have seen it as completely sort of neutral? Well, not neutral, but did they abuse this privilege that they had, and have previous governments also done it? But I'll sort of get an answer from them in the closing comments. We have about less than an hour, about 40 minutes left, and I did want to take 5 minutes at the end to sum up. But obviously this is an interactive discussion, so I'd let you now ask questions. I'll take questions in sort of groups of 5, if you like. So please ask questions. Students get preference, and in the spirit of what Professor Charan Singh said, women students will get more of a preference. No. Are there any lady students who want to ask questions? Come on. I mean, in my 20 years that I taught in IMI, never even once did a male student top my class in economics. Never. Okay, you should ask questions. Don't worry if you think it's not a intelligent question. All questions are intelligent. Yes, please. Do you want to take this mic?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karthik. So my question is to
I think it's okay. You can just stand up and ask. It's a small enough place.
My question is to Professor Charan Singh. As you mentioned, sir,
we as a country, we had a banking system which existed for more than 200 years or 300 years, and we should not follow Basel norms. But even we as a country had very difficult situations where government and RBI combinedly bought the banks out of that issue. Like, is it not RBI and government frequently bailing out the banks from those issues? It's a kind of bringing the taxpayers' money to solve the question, to solve the problem of the particular bank. Like probably recently we have seen many issues. And my second question is, does it relate to the culture of India, where we are much more into the conservative side, like we don't spend much when compared to the Western countries? So that's why we don't have those great depressions which the Western countries face.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Morning, everyone. My question is for Dr. Charan Singh. Sir, as you mentioned regarding the Mudra loan, recently in one of the interview, our ex-governor Dr. Gurram Rajan mentioned his concern regarding the NPA which is turning out of the Mudra loan. And my second question is, sir, recently we saw so many 3 or 4 states giving a farm loan waiver. In fact, the budget we have seen, there are the 6,000 direct transfer to them. It is actually costing them 75,000 crore to the exchequer. Sir, I would like to ask how exactly these waivers and these direct transfer to the farmer are actually solving their issues. Because there was a report by World Bank that when there is a farm loan waiver, there is rather increase in the suicide rate rather than decreasing. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Saurabh Sarkar. I'm a first year student from IMI Gurgaon. My question is for Mr. Sanyal. So while the budget is being largely by and large being lauded among the communities that I have interacted with in the past couple of days, there's one particular confusion that is being raised. I mean, I was at the eGrow Foundation's meet day before yesterday under the leadership of Dr. Charan Singh and Dr. Arvind. There was one confusion regarding this thing that pegging the GST rate of cement at 28%, is it not disincentivizing the economic growth, given that a large percentage of GDP comes from infrastructure development. Also about this thing called the oil destabilization and the isolation that Dr. Venu talked about. Niti Aayog has suggested the ethanol blending option till the time the EV technology has been developed. Would you not like to see, or would you not like to, you would like to see a little more aggressiveness on the part of the government on the ethanol blending thing, given that it might help save a large amount of fuel?
Thank you. Do you have other questions? Two more questions and then I'll come back to the panel.
Hello, thank you for a very insightful session from all of you. So my question is directed to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal in particular, that the government, there is a inflation in the prices, we immediately stop all exports, and we have, by other similar measures, we have always served to not allow the markets to develop in a very mature fashion. That was an intent when this government came in, that they would work on things like cold storage warehouses and go on with the commodity exchange, which has not been in similarly scale that would have solved that problem. So how do you see solving that problem? And do you think that the government should have been cut some slack in terms of that it has tried to correct many wrongs that were both fiscally and executive, in terms of that there were IBC was required, there were huge amounts of NPAs and so on and so forth from the RBI and others, which it was not, at least in principle, very open to being allowed. So what are your opinions on that?
One last question for this round.
Good afternoon, panelists. My question is two-faced. First question is to Mr. Sandeep, and how do you see the education spend, which is around 38,000 crore, vis-a-vis defense spend, which is around 3 lakh crores? How do you see it spanning out, and how do you see the trickle-down effect of it, especially with focus on AI and other technologies that the government is promoting? Secondly, to Mr. Charan Singh, I think you gave an interview where you said that fiscal deficit is not very important, even if we breach it, if it's push-oriented, growth pushing oriented. So do you see this budget, because it has already breached fiscal deficit, as being a budget which is going to push growth instead of deflating it in the coming years? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question. Let me start with Professor Charan Singh. Whatever you wish to answer.
This question of taxpayers' money in bailing out and the culture where we don't spend extensively and then there's a great, therefore we don't get into Great Depression sort of a situation. Well, we are a very balanced society in that sense. There are Chinese who save 50% and invest 40%. Then there are the Americans who don't save at all and the world saves for them and they invest everything. So we are a very balanced society. So to that extent, I think that's the right strategy. A country which is suffering from 30% poverty, 30% illiteracy rate, youth unemployment in the range of about 20%. And this is a very balanced thing, nothing to worry on that. It's cultural because we are conservative, and we are also a culture which has survived 5,000 years could not have been an adventure culture. It had to be a conservative culture. Very responsibly we take every step. The first part of your question was basically that did the Reserve Bank and the Government of India not bail out some banks, and did they not use the taxpayers' money? Look here, this is a very good question, but please remember, none of our banks failed. Our regulator and supervisor, where I belonged once, I know it how critically they evaluate and then the parent institution. Now there's a difference between a parent and a neighbor. The neighbor loves to have a crisis in a neighbor's house, but parent knows the problem, but then nurtures the child to health and recovery without making a mockery out of it. There are situations when a regulator or a supervisor comes to know that there is a weakness in this little child, fulfills the gap, nurtures it and brings it. In case it cannot, then it does another operation and allows it to go and merge into another bank, but the depositor's money is not lost. That part has to be always taken into account. The thought that you had that taxpayers' money is being used, probably what you are talking of is recapitalization. Yes, that is true. If you look at the theory of accounting, if there is a market which is sagging or there is a problem, the asset value does go down and their recapitalization is obvious. But if you look up my, I'll give you a gist of it, but you're welcome to look at my paper on public sector banks. Public sector banks have done two things which other banks don't. Firstly, they have been constantly paying dividend to the government whenever they have made profits. The second thing is public sector banks have carried the social control and social obligation burden and gone and opened branches where foreign banks only go as tourists in the villages, right? So keep that in mind, that the public sector bank has mobilized lots of resources, deposits from areas where nobody else wants to go. So they have done that, and therefore that they have benefited the taxpayer, and when it comes to recapitalization, it is a sort of a win-win situation, both are working for each other. Now this question, this young gentleman asked about the famous rock star governor that India had, who had been imported and helicopter dropped and taken away when the situation was becoming difficult. I think you know the name of that governor. He's talking of mudra loans, right? I simply asked a question. How much is the percentage? Not even 3%. Mudra loans are serving people as given in the budget, as referred earlier, very, very downtrodden people. People who need a loan of 50,000, a loan of 5 lakhs, a loan of 10 lakhs under the different schemes of Shishu and all that. This country, where 30% of the population is below poverty line, young people are available for jobs as far as the demographics concerned. In case there's a default and trying to make it big and give TV interviews and become global hero once again doesn't serve the purpose of the people living in this country. You come and live with me and then give interviews, I'm ready to accept that. Sitting far away, mudra loan is serving the most common man on the street. I'll now give you a real example. I did a survey in Bombay. There's a banana seller. He has gone on normal terms in the morning to buy bananas on his head. He's a headload worker. He has bought bananas. Suddenly that day something happens in Bombay and he can't sell his bananas. So what happens? His whole fruit is going waste. Now where does he go? The banker is coming for him to collect the money. He's avoiding the banker. That's one simple case. He doesn't have cold storage. He doesn't know where to put the fruit in the night for. These are the type of people, and the largest amount of mudra loans have gone under the 50,000 rupees thing. I have checked, and of course in my own bank, I've spoken to other bankers who are the beneficiaries of the mudra loan. Very, very small level people. And the NPA levels are so small there, making a mockery of it doesn't really, I don't think the governor should have even stepped into it. I would provide, but I should also not hide something from you. There are instances where people do not have proper houses. They have taken a mudra loan and over a period of 6 months to 8 months moved their house. Now the banker is finding it difficult to trace this person. There are some instances like that also. But in the banking business, these things are obviously factored in and then taken into account. So this is no alarm, and I was myself surprised when I read that news item, and I myself gave an interview on this, saying that this is not something which we should raise, we should respect it. Now the issue that has been raised on the farm. Now again, I looked into this earlier and I was cautioned by one of the journalists that don't write it. But I can of course speak. If you look at the suicide rates in the country, farmer suicides do not outnumber other suicides. That fact, as scholars, we should know. We don't have to be alarmist. If you look at, no suicide is good. No suicide is good. But if you're going to blackmail me by saying that the farmer's suicide rate is the highest, I'm sorry. Actually, the data doesn't support it. That is the fact. Now, when you talk of farm loan waiver, 3 states have done it, and I've written extensively on this, and there are scholars who have written on it, that when there's a farm loan which is outstanding, it blocks the complete movement of money in that area. I'm also aware, partly because I've been a banker, partly because I've done surveys, that when loans are taken, people avoid the banker after that. And they use the first excuse, either a drought or a flood or a hailstorm, not to repay the loan and asking help from the political parties to somehow bail it out. I'm aware of that fact. But there are genuine cases where farm loan waivers have to be given. And here are 2-3 cases. Look, even today, 60% of Indian agriculture is on rain-fed agriculture. 60%, not irrigation-based, not canal-based irrigation. So if it's rain-fed irrigation, then obviously the farmer is the most vulnerable to anything that is happening in nature. This global warming is impacting the farmer the most. The latest case which has been brought to my notice is of the apple industry. Because 2 degrees have gone up, the apple growing industry in Himachal Pradesh, they're suddenly finding their apples have lost the juicy part because they need a certain temperature, and the skin of the apple is changing, which is not now selling in the Indian market. So they are the ones who are most vulnerable. And because they can't repay, you block their next installments, next bank account, it really impacts the cycle there. So therefore, the farmer thing has to be seen a little carefully. Now, I have been questioned many times. There's 8 lakh, or some people say 11 lakh crore of NPAs. Some of them have been written off, some of them will come under the insolvency, some of them will go under NCLT, all this SARFAESI Act, there will be haircuts, all this will happen. Massive losses will take place. That doesn't take into account. But the moment you give 10 paisa to a farmer, the whole country says, hey, the farmer is again getting a benefit. So I think that has to be seen a little sympathetic. The last point which was asked to me is the fiscal deficit. Now I'll tell you one thing. Again, I'm very, very sorry to talk in this way. Here is the data from 1975. You can all see it. It is there on the Reserve Bank's website. This 3% deficit to GDP ratio, which rating agencies tom everywhere, and 60% debt to GDP ratio, on which we are threatened that we'll reduce your rating, where did it come from? Maastricht Treaty. Maastricht Treaty, which is the basis of the euro. And in that, countries which are there, 10 don't observe it at all. Their debt to GDP ratios are 200%. Their fiscal deficits are much higher. Rating agencies don't have the courage to tell euro I will remove or reduce your rating. They come to India, and because we are little Indians, always sky and shy, or conservative, we pray, sir, don't remove our rating. I am giving you this data. Last 30 years, 75 onwards, more than 35 years, 40 years, right? Our GFD, gross fiscal deficit, has been hovering around 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%. Actually, in 1 year, 8.13%.
Center and states together.
No, I'm only talking of center at this point.
Center. I thought it was GFD.
No, GFD. Nothing happened to India. And these rating agencies scare me that if you go beyond 3%, you know what will happen? What will happen? Tell me what will happen. Why did that not happen to Greece? Why did that not happen to Italy? Why does it not happen to those countries which are running a deficit and debt to GDP ratio more than 100%? 30 countries are running. They don't listen to rating agencies. My request to you, Sanjeev, please tell the rating agencies they are not permitted to rate a country. My request to you, they mislead you. Tell them to go and rate these Tatas, Birlas who give them gifts. And they should stop rating countries. At least they should not rate India. Can they rate China? Moment they rate China, they'll not be allowed to enter China. Google, Gmail, everybody had to go out. Let's do the same thing. You are sitting amongst us, we are so lucky today. Please convey this sentiment. Thank you so much.
I
should say one thing, please don't mistake me. I'm not saying that the country should go profligate. All I'm saying in my interview, which was referred to, was that the best study done on the deficit was, where is the money being used? And that comes from FC Domer, published in American Economic Review in 1944, saying that if you are an emerging country, growing country, a teenage country, you will obviously eat more and not earn that much. But if you are growing the potential and you will grow, that should be taken into cognizance. That's exactly what has happened in India. I know revenue deficits have also been there, but at least last 50 years data shows that nothing happened to us. Maybe because we are conservative, maybe because we are religious, whatever we are. Thank you.
Thank you. So, may I, so on this good note, I want to get Sanjeev back because he has to also leave and he wanted to answer or sort of respond to some of the comments that were made. So please answer the questions as well as some comments you wanted to make.
Yeah, they're all interconnected, so I have a hard stop, so I'll try and answer as many of the questions as possible. I'll start with, in fact, the question that you raised on RBI independence, because that came up as well. Let me say that this government takes the autonomy of the central bank very, very seriously. It was this government that, in fact, set up the Monetary Policy Committee to institutionalize monetary policy making. So we take it the whole thing very seriously. It is also us that have been putting in such a large effort into cleaning up the banking system, imposing. I agree, Basel III has severe issues, but anyway, nonetheless, imposing some sort of an order into a completely unsupervised lending system. So we take the whole matter seriously. However, independence of the Reserve Bank of India is not independence from the Republic of India. This is an important thing you need to realize, that when greater independence and powers are given, you also need to take into account that it needs a greater amount of being answerable to somebody. So to whom is the RBI answerable? Now, in most central banks in the world, they are answerable to either to the government or to the legislature. So, in our system, as the way the RBI Act 1935 is set up, it is answerable to the board. That is how it is set up. And of course, the board includes RBI's own officials. It includes some independent directors which are put in place by the government. And it includes 2 members from the government itself, the secretaries of DEA and DFS. So, we have strengthened the board. The board has begun to ask questions of the management of the RBI. Maybe some people do not like it, but this is the only way you can have a real autonomy, because real autonomy also requires that you have accountability. So I'm afraid the central bank has to also be held accountable, and there have been many issues. After all, the RBI did exist when all this lending was being done, when many of the issues related to NPAs, the NBFC growth, etc. was happening. Why did the board not ask them the questions? Why is there not enough debate about the fact that for 3 or 4 years, RBI has systematically, unidirectionally made mistakes on forecasting inflation, for example? So there needs to be some accountability, and the board has to be the body through which this accountability is exercised. So I'm afraid I do not buy this argument about RBI independence at all. We take it seriously, but to say that it must be independent from the Republic of India totally does not, I don't buy that. And that is incidentally also true about its rating. Former Governor Raghuram Rajan made a comment that RBI will lose its AAA rating. As it happens to be, the RBI does not have a credit rating, AAA or otherwise. Second, since it is a fully owned subsidiary of the government, its rating, anybody who does any rating at all will tell you that it is capped by the rating of the sovereign. So our rating, whatever it is, according to whichever sovereign rating, and none of them of India's sovereign ratings is AAA. Therefore, the RBI, by definition, cannot have a AAA rating. So it was somewhat disingenuous of Raghu to make that statement. I think quite irresponsible. Now, as far as the other issues are concerned that we have raised, there were some issues raised about oil. Yes, we continue to be dependent on international oil, and that is how, unfortunately, our natural endowments are. And yes, we are serious about moving ourselves into other sources of energy. You may know about the national solar mission and other things. But as things stand, we continue to be dependent on imported oil. That is how it is. But even in that particular case, please notice that we have been as responsible as possible. During the episode last year, when oil did spike up to 85, we allowed all of it mostly to pass through, except at the very end when it became spiraling out beyond a certain point. We did allow for some reduction in excise and so on, but by and large, most of it was allowed to pass through, knowing fully well all the political pressures from it, and most importantly, no such thing about oil bonds and other things were put up as had been done in the past. So, speaking about off-balance sheet items, let it be clear that we have been responsible in that as well. If Mr. Nainan wanted to have a discussion on this particular issue, he should have also mentioned all the off-balance sheet borrowings done in the past as well and compare how this government has gone. We have been much more responsible than ever before. Now, Dr. Charan Singh also raised this issue about ratings. There is a structural problem with international ratings of India. And this is basically done that one odd item is a very important item in international sovereign ratings, which is per capita income. Now, I've never understood, and I've asked this every time, why is per capita income there? Because there is not much correlation between actually either ability or willingness to pay and per capita income. After all, Argentina has a per capita income which is multiples of ours, and they keep defaulting every other year. Greece's per capita income is almost, it's more than 10 times ours. And they have, my own view is per capita income is essentially a sly proxy for skin tone. So this is basically what it really is about. And I think it's entirely unfair because for whatever it's worth, even in 1991, we did not default. We were willing to ship out our gold, we did not default. So I think willingness to pay is something on which we count a lot, and even on ability to pay, let's be very clear, as Dr. Charan Singh pointed out, our debt to GDP ratio is radically lower than that of many countries that are rated much higher than us. And also, since we're talking about debt sustainability, even if you do your basic debt sustainability maths, you will know debt sustainability is all about nominal GDP growth rate and your nominal interest rate. In that space, given that we are the world's fastest growing economy, even despite the fact that our nominal GDP growth rate has come down because of inflation coming off, we still have a very healthy gap between our borrowing and the rate at which our economy is growing. That gives us a cushion for running a fiscal deficit, a cushion that we should use. We are not having spiraling debt to GDP ratios. In fact, our debt to GDP ratio has broadly been stable for some time. So again, I would argue that this is an issue that just look at the maths, don't take my word for it. So an area where I think rating agencies have been again not quite been fair to India at multiple levels. Now comes the issue which I'm going to end with, which is about jobs. This has been in the debate recently quite a lot, so I'm going to talk about it. Now, given the size of India, its stage of development, and our demographics, jobs will be a major issue. It has been a major issue in the past, and it will be for the next 20-25 years a major issue. So it is a very serious issue on which, unfortunately, there's no serious debate. Instead, there's a lot of random point scoring in a world with very little data. There is a serious problem about collecting data about it. And so the debate goes on somewhat like this. Since there is no great data, and by the way, to the extent any serious publicly available data is available, which is the EPFO data, it does show that some employment generation is happening. Now I agree that EPFO data also has problems. But anyway, the debate sort of progresses like this. So many, every time a government advertises jobs, so many applicants come. if there was not unemployment in India, the only people attending the Kumbh Mela would have been a few sadhus and tourists. Really? Is that what you interpreted? Is this the quality of the debate that we need to have on a serious issue? There's complete non-seriousness. Now comes a report that NSSO has supposed to have put together. By the way, that report is not in the public domain. This entire debate is being done based on rumor and innuendo and supposedly leaked reports to the press. The question is who's leaked it is a completely interesting issue in its own right. But I'm going to therefore, since I'm a government official, I cannot react to the report itself since it's not public. And by the way, I've not read it either. But I will respond to many of the press reports that have been made, which go on to suggest that India's unemployment rate is now the highest it has been in half a century. Now, I happen to be old enough to remember the 1970s and 80s, and in fact even the 1991 crisis. It is laughable to say that the unemployment problem and the social strife we are having right now is worse than what was the case in 1970s and 80s. I was there to see it. That's totally not the case. Now, of course, the solution to all of this is to have a proper measurement system for unemployment and joblessness in this country, which I grant is something that needs to be taken seriously, but there are serious methodological problems, which is not something we discovered this year. They've been for a long, long time. A rapidly growing economy in the age of gig economy is everywhere it's going to be a problem, but for us it is a particular problem to measure unemployment. But we need to solve this to get around this debate. But unfortunately, this debate has almost entirely been held in a vacuum, mostly for political point scoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. So we have two more panelists. We unfortunately can't take any more questions. We have two more panelists. So let me ask Anu for his comment.
To pay or ability to pay, but the socio-economic impact of something like GDP per capita. And if it is very, very low, there are possibilities of having socio-economic issues, social unrest kind of thing. That's not the point. Coming back to the discussion point of budget, fiscal deficit is a number, but the quality of expenditure which is being done, because what is the root cause of that fiscal deficit? The expenditure, and the quality of that expenditure is reflecting that we are moving ahead towards more revenue expenditure than infrastructure creation. In the FY 19-20 budget, the capex is expected to grow by just 6%, while the revenue expenditure is expected to grow by 14%. So the quality of expenditure has also deteriorated, at least is being projected to deteriorate in FY 19-20. So this also weighs in the final fiscal deficit number. The quality of fiscal discipline you are maintaining, whether it is for growth or is for meeting your day-to-day expenditure, which is called revenue expenditure. So with that context, I would say that overall the budget is positive from the consumption perspective. It will drive the consumption for various sectors. But fiscal deficit, the quality of expenditure certainly is a concern. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say, make a couple of points. I must respond to what Sanjeev Sanyal said about data. See, my problem is not interpretation of data. My problem is, why is the government hiding data? Whatever, these are NSSO data collection. Charan Singh would vouch, he's been an economist for some. Is admired, it's praised for its credibility around the world. Even IMF World Bank say that India's NSSO data, given the more than 500,000, sample that they across covering informal sector. This data, if it was good for all these 40-50 years, certainly why is government, when the National Statistical Commission on 5th December approved the data, after it was to be published, the moment, see, you make public the data and then you say, it's fair, that on these counts we do not agree with. But the NSSO data says that youth unemployment in 2017 is more than 18%. And it's all there in business standard. The report is free.
How do you know it's not public? That is the issue.
Because you're still not making it public, and the government still says that we are examining it. The Niti Aayog chairman says it's a draft report. I have never heard this. After National Statistical Commission approves it, he's calling it draft. I think this is political chicanery. You're trying to mislead the people. And there's another big Labour Department 2016-17 employment report, which the 2015-16 was made public. 2016-17 the same, and mind you, the survey, the sample there is more than 7 lakh individuals across informal and formal sector. It's an annual survey. That was also they chose to hide it. That also got leaked in business standard. So all I'm saying is your own data institutions, collection, collation, why are you destroying them? Let them put out whatever they're putting out. You contest it. We are happy to have that debate. But why are you hiding the data? I mean, Labour Bureau data. So much so that Murli Manohar Joshi, Parliamentary Committee, I was speaking to him the other day, he had to put out in his own BJP senior MP on economy. There's a Parliamentary Committee where he has clearly said that we have no data official data to determine employment status since 2011-12, the last NSSO, This is the state of, data.
So let me contest this. This is actually not true at all.
Everything that I've told you is 100% factual.
Not at all. So in fact, this is not true. If the data has been collected, yes, it has to be looked at properly before being put out. And by the way, if it is put out, there will be a lot of debate about this thing. For example, when the GDP data is put out and it was discovered that it caused the news series caused the numbers of a certain period of time to go down, there was screams saying, oh, now this is the wrong data. So basically, whenever the data comes out in a certain way, irrespective of what it is, it's not about putting the data out. It is about what the data says according to whose political view. So it is nothing, I'm sorry, this rather smug statement that, oh, the data is not being put out. By the way, if the data was put out, you would have the same reaction. So I think this is an entirely disingenuous, smug approach, that when it doesn't suit your political affiliations, then, oh my God, business standard must be the right source.
You put out all data. So let them.
We are putting it out.
No, you didn't. NSSO was cleared by National Statistical Commission.
No, so it has to be looked at before we put it out. I'm sorry, this is how the procedure is. It happened every time.
No,
the Planning Commission used to do it.
National Statistical Commission is the apex body. After that, you can't now change the data, right?
No, the data has not been changed.
Oh, okay. So,
I want Charan Singh to talk about NSSO.
Okay, I think if I were a student sitting there, I would have really enjoyed. This has been a stimulating discussion, and it's of course a microcosm of what India is as opposed to China. And this is a healthy sort of tradition that we enjoy being in India, and we can agree to disagree on certain things and yet not be sort of violent about it. And I think this is the healthy context of what Amartya Sen called the argumentative Indian. And I think we will continue to sort of enjoy this tradition in India many, many years until you have come to occupy positions of responsibility and influence, and you're probably sitting on this side. I want to make a couple of points from my perspective, then we'll conclude. I'll be very staccato. I'm not going to give you long, boring talk, but just staccato points so that as students and also try and summarize what has been said without getting into sort of any controversy. Where I see, from the point of view of our research institution, the work that we do, I see India sort of going through a development path which is challenging, no doubt, and we're trying to be where China was maybe 15, 20 years ago, trying to become sort of an engine of growth for the world that China has played. But unfortunately, we see challenges coming up, Trump, greater protection, so that to take off on the basis of exports, textile, the example of textile, which I think is extremely important in terms of labor-intensive growth, in terms of textiles, in terms of employment provision, that's extremely critical for us. We have to be not only competitive at home, but we have to be also competitive abroad, which is what China was, but we face the challenges of protectionism. The other challenge we face in the global market is the fact that we're not too much a part of these global value chains with China and becoming. Hopefully, GST will allow us to integrate at home, and logistics and ports and trade facilitation will allow us to integrate with outside markets. I don't think we can provide gainful employment without being without engaging women, and the point that Professor Charan Singh made, and without becoming competitive in labor-intensive sectors. Automation, poses another challenge, and there's lots of research going on. As Sanjeev says, we need to become, in the sense, get a lot more data and to really be able to see what the data is telling us. Right now, automation and sort of replacement of capital for labor is at a stage where we can't. It's sort of speculative. There's a lot of alarmist thinking and alarmist research being put out there. The World Bank chief, who's now moved on, at one point made the comment that 75 to 79% of India's labor force is at risk of automation. I think an alarmist statement coming from the World Bank. Of course, the World Bank has also given the Golden Peacock Award to corporate governance to Satyam a few days before it collapsed. So World Bank should make responsible statements. I mean, that it becomes very alarmist. 70% of our jobs, or 79% of our jobs are at risk due to automation. You know what automation would do, I think, is going to replace tasks and not entire jobs. And I think that sort of deconstruction or deep dive in the research is beginning to happen. Freya and Osborne are the researchers who've begun to do this. So that's the sort of employment. We have a jobs sort of concern. What is employment? What is organized? What is unorganized? The gig economy. Are Ola, Uber drivers going to be a part of this economy? So this whole job situation in India, given that we are young, we are aspirational, is something that we have to look at seriously. But to my mind, where I sit, I think without labor-intensive employment, especially for women, I see it difficult for the service economy to be able to play the part that manufacturing played for China. So that's one part of what we need to look at. I think as students, you need to also put your minds to this. You won't have any jobs problem. I think the jobs problem will be more to the sort of less educated, less skilled, those sort of people. Given that the surveys after surveys show, as Professor Charan Singh said, there's this obsession with government jobs in India. I mean, which is what Sanjeev was also hinting at. Obsession with government jobs, and unfortunately, I don't think the government is going to be able to be a sort of engine for job. Nehru's vision of employer of last resort, I think it's gone. And in that context, UBI becomes important. And I think that UBI debate we should have, universal basic income, how universal it should be, how sort of quasi it should be. I mean, the context is as follows. Because Indians are so poor, direct benefit transfers, direct unemployment insurance to people should be such that it provides them a sustenance, but it doesn't become a substitute for providing jobs to them, i.e. it should not become a moral hazard. That is, UBI should not disincentivize, but at the same time it should not make you completely dependent on that and vulnerable because you don't have any money. So it will substitute some for lack of employment, lack of income, but it should not become a disincentive for creating jobs, and government cannot create this. So UBI debate we should have, but it should not be, UBI is really, we shouldn't have an individual provide for fish himself. So that's, one major concern that we have, and I don't think government or the private sector, etc., will each able to do this on their own. The second issue, and I think you asked this question to Sanjeev, gentlemen, well, why don't we allow agriculture exports to happen? I think it's a good question, and we should debate this question. Why do we ban? And I think part of the reason is that agriculture has been at the receiving end of the terms of trade for a long, long time. And why? In the interest of the middle class. So the consumers, the middle class, were at the forefront of policy rather than the farmers. Now today, farmers are beginning to be at the forefront or the subjects of policy making, and I think that's the right thing. When onion prices rise, farmers should gain, but we ban exports, we import sort of onions to placate the middle class. We've never thought about what the farmer. Farming is a very sort of risky business. In India especially, 70% of the farmers are farm less than 1 hectare, and 75% of the farmers contribute, 75% of the farming is done by less than 25% of the farmers. So that's that 80-20 rule. There's a large number of very small farms, and therefore very risky farms, and they don't get the remunerative prices for their sort of produce. And then we have the agricultural price marketing committees that don't allow realization of the market price, and most of these APMCs are then controlled by the local politicians. So that's another big reform that we need to have in India. Market-based prices, then of course direct benefit transfers so that farmers are able to get some income. And the last point I would make is on corruption, the point that Professor Charan Singh had made. And I think this is an important thing that is happening in India. If you notice, if you've heard the finance minister's speech, he said there will be complete digitization in tax collections, and there will be no interface between the taxman and the taxpayer. I think this is a good thing, very good thing to actually being able to be implemented. I grew up, even before Sanjeev, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And Bollywood films are a reflection of our times. And there was this endless harassment of people by the tax, depicted in many of the Bollywood films. We know there's rent seeking going on, and we know that there is corruption, but of course, tali ek haath se nahi bachti. To both sides, there are people who are willing to hide their income, and therefore the tax people are able to exercise their disproportionate power that they have at the time of tax collections. But digitization will help this, but corruption or the sort of lack of it has to pervade down to the grassroots. You can't have it only at the center. It must go down to the states and the local government as well. And I think this is a good thing, because corruption, does add. Okay, black money is also sweet money, and some, it contributes to GDP. But at the end of the day, a lot of good things cannot happen because of rent seeking. And the moment this happens, I think the compliance, what Sanjeev was referring to and what Professor Charan Singh also referred to, compliance has to increase. We are one of the undertaxed in terms of our tax to GDP ratios. We're not very high. So when you have compliance improvement with GST should give us a bounce. When more and more direct taxpayers come into the tax net and tax to GDP goes up to 15, 16, 17%, then the government will have its fiscal space to do what we think that the government should be doing, not subsidies, but investments, health, education, and away from what it's doing at the moment. So, some of the things that the budget does try to address, it also provides us 10 vision statements of where we are expecting to be in 2030. But I think there are challenges for the Indian economy, women, climate change. These are all challenges for the, one could talk a lot about them, but there are challenges, and I'd like to end by, what Ghalib had said. Mushkilein itni padi ke aasan ho gayi. And I think that we are going through a challenging path, but also, I think we are also learning to become resilient and cope with these challenges. So I think the Indian economy has a great future, as if it doesn't sort of become the engine of growth that China was, but I think it will be the fastest major growing economy for a few years to come. And I think we should now begin to take, in some sense, we should begin to exercise soft power that we've been wanting to but have not been able to. And I just sort of conclude by saying that today Australia has put out an India Strategy 2035 because they feel India is going to matter not only to them but to the rest of the world. And there will be many such countries other than Australia, Canada and countries in Europe, that will begin to recognize India not only for its market power, which we do have, but also for its soft power. So let me, thank all of you, thank IMI, thank you students for attending this, and especially thank all the panelists for having spared the time and stayed even after they thought they would stay, because I think it's been a very, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.